Hello, I'm Martin Blaser. I'm the director of the Center for Advanced Biotechnology in Medicine, or CABM. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with CABM resident faculty member, Dr. Aaron Milstein. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Neuroscience and Cell Biology at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. So welcome, Aaron.
Hi, Marty.
Good to see you. So just to get started, maybe you could tell us a little about your education and your early career before you came to CABM.
Well, I did my undergraduate at MIT, and I initially thought that I was going to study computer science there. This was kind of like the early days of the internet, and Bill Gates had predicted that there would be a personal computer in every home in America, but it turned out that it was our cell phones, but we didn't realize that quite yet. But then when I arrived at MIT, all of the interesting conversations that I was having with people were about neuroscience and were about the brain. And these things were related for me because, the brain, everything that we perceive, everything that we think and we feel and we remember is performed by our brains. And in theory, we would be able to build a computer that could do a lot of these same, cognitive tasks that humans can do. If we just understood how the brain could work, we could build a better computer to perform those kinds of tasks. And so I started doing neuroscience research at MIT, but I really became so quickly pulled into the biology. And so I kind of set aside the computer aspect for a long time. And my PhD in San Francisco at UCSF was really focused on sort of basic biology questions about the brain and how memories were stored sort of mechanistically in neurons. But I kind of eventually came full circle where I felt like we had all of this great information about the way that neurons worked and the way that they were wired up together in the brain to sort of mediate perception and memory. And it was kind of time to start doing some computation again and figuring out, are there basic principles about how computation works in the brain that we could actually use to build better artificial learning systems again? So that's sort of what I'm bringing back into my lab, is incorporating the wet lab biology and the sort of computational modeling aspect.
Right, terrific. How long have you been at CABM? I know it's not been that long. And what brought you here?
Well, I just arrived in August, and so I was lucky that I have projects that are focused on computational modeling, and so sort of research could continue even during quarantine. But I'm still in the process of ordering equipment and hiring my first couple of lab members, and so I'm kind of looking forward to that time when I really will have arrived and I'll be sitting in a conference room with my lab members and sort of doing the thing that I love the most, which is being on a whiteboard and brainstorming and sort of going over papers together and such. So I won't really have arrived until that happens, but I think that's in the near future now.
So in that near future, what do you think the main focus of your lab is going to be? What are some of the key questions you want to explore?
Right. So going back to this idea of computation, if you think about a computer, I mean, a computer takes in some input and then it has some program that it's using to process all of that information. And it's maybe comparing to some information that was stored in memory, and then it can produce some kind of an output. So that's like a black box, and there's some algorithm that's being applied in the middle. And so you could think of the brain that way, that, it's just the most important thing about the brain is, well, what are the algorithms that it's implementing and to carry out things like cognition? But then on the other end is the actual substrate. So like, what's the brain made out of? And so if you think that the algorithm is important, then maybe it doesn't matter if it's a brain that's performing some computation or whether it's some circuit and it's made out of silicone or it's made out of neurons. So far throughout my career, like every time that we've really dived in and try to understand more about the substrate, it turns out that we end up learning a little bit more about the algorithm. And so, my feeling is that if we really understand what neurons can do and how neurons are organized in the brain, evolution sort of devised the substrate and the algorithm kind of together. They're intertwined. And so my lab is really interested in kind of what are the nuts and bolts mechanisms for how brains wire up and how they end up being able to perform the functions that they subserve.
Yeah, so that's a broad program. Is there any particular project that you think right now you find very exciting?
Right. So again, going back to this idea that, during evolution, the brain was sort of wired up, and there are genes that control the organization of the brain. And we know that when some of the genes involved in that sort of neurodevelopmental program are perturbed, then the brain ends up being wired differently. And then also learning and memory ends up being perturbed. And so there are neurodevelopmental disorders that come along with disorders like epilepsy and sensory motor learning disorders. And so this is how I'm going to try to solve, ask questions about the sort of structure-function relationship of the brain. If the brain has this architecture, it can perform this learning task. And what are the learning rules? What are the algorithms that are being implemented? But in a brain where it's been wired up differently and it's performing learning tasks differently, can we sort of understand what went wrong and what that relationship is between sort of brain architecture and function?
Yeah, great. So let's change bases a little, and let me ask you, how do you interact with students and trainees? Do you have a particular philosophy?
Well, since things have been virtual so far, my strategy has been to sort of create interactive tutorials that teach students the sort of basics for coding that they might need, or basics in the sort of neuronal cell biology that they might need. And so far it's been, one-on-one that I can really go over all of these exercises together with the student. And so, I mean, I would love for that to continue. I think that eventually your bandwidth gets reduced, but hopefully this would be something cultural where, I could do this with my first students and postdocs, and then they would be able to kind of help train each other by having this kind of, tutorial interactive type of approach.
Yeah, great. So are you doing anything else at Rutgers or in the scientific community you want to tell us about?
Well, one of my roles here at CABM is actually to direct a new bioinformatics program. And this is very broadly defined. I mean, I kind of view sort of bioinformatics and computational biology as just use of mathematical and computational tools to help us answer our biological questions. And so I'm kind of in a phase of trying to determine what exists at Rutgers already, and if there is to be a new program here at CABM, how it could best serve the needs of the community. And so this has actually been a great excuse to just kind of, cold call a lot of people at Rutgers and ask them about their work and sort of get to know them. And so, Rutgers is a diverse community that has multiple campuses. And so I've really used this as a way to kind of plug into the network of research groups that are at the different campuses and involved in different subdomains of biology. It's been really fun.
Yeah, great. My last question is a little weird question, so with apologies. So imagine you're at the end of your career, and we're trying to write your scientific obituary. What would you like to be remembered about? What would it be?
Well, my sort of, pie in the sky goal right now is that we'll be able to use computational models of brain circuits to really inform the clinic. And so if I'm able to devise models that allow us to come up with treatment strategies for neurological disorders, then that's really going to be where I can make an impact. And that will be, the first example of, sort of computational neuroscience that dives into the sort of biological details being exploited to then be able to, once we understand the mechanism, that means that we can fix the mechanism if it's broken. And so that's what I'd really like to be remembered for, is my contribution to treatment and disorder.
Well, that is an important goal, and I wish you luck. And thanks so much for meeting with me.
Thank you, Marty. That was fun.